Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I started working at Tech Solutions, Inc. in early 2019. The company had been around for about a decade before I joined. During my 4-year tenure, we grew to dominate the market, capturing about 75% of the regional share for our unique tech support service. We were a tight-knit team of 15 employees. I genuinely loved my job, and the skills I acquired were invaluable. The team was great, and our clients were fantastic. My biannual reviews with Sarah, the owner, always resulted in perfect scores. I excelled in every aspect of my role: managing operations, HR, payroll, customer service, marketing, employee oversight, scheduling, training for both staff and clients, and numerous other responsibilities. I was also capable of covering for any of my colleagues when they were out. In August 2022, Sarah was distributing bonuses. Mine, while larger than previous years, was noticeably smaller than my coworkers. I approached her asking, "Sarah, are these bonuses performance-based? If so, what could I have done to earn more?" Sarah replied bluntly, "The bonuses aren't performance-related. You're just more replaceable than the others." I was taken aback but managed to respond with a simple, "Oh, I see." I processed the bonuses and headed out for lunch. I called my partner Alex seeking advice. I was furious but didn't want to make a rash decision. Alex, with their 20 years of experience as an executive and involvement in various business advisory boards, has an uncanny ability to foresee potential outcomes. We agreed to proceed with our planned vacation and use the time to clear our heads and strategize. The next day at work, I maintained a facade of normalcy. As we left for our trip, Alex asked, "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," I replied. "Just looking forward to some time away to think things through." During our vacation, we explored different scenarios. We consulted with a business advisor and an attorney. Alex suggested, "Maybe this is an opportunity for you to start something of your own." I nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. I have some ideas that Sarah never let me implement." Upon returning, I decided to resign with a 2-week notice. However, when I informed Sarah, she erupted, "You ungrateful! You're fired! Get out now!" This reaction, while extreme, wasn't entirely unexpected. I calmly gathered my things and left. Over the next few weeks, I established my own company, Tech Solutions, offering similar services but with more customizable options and higher quality results. I knew our former clients desired these improvements, ideas I had proposed multiple times at Tech Solutions, but were always shot down because Sarah hadn't thought of them herself. I maintained casual contact with a few former colleagues. They occasionally vented to me, though I never pried about the company's affairs. It was clear that service quality and work environment had deteriorated since my departure. Morale plummeted, and client satisfaction nosedived. The Google and Facebook reviews for Tech Solutions became painful to read. Tech Solutions hired 2 full-time and 1 part-time employee to cover my previous responsibilities, and they outsourced HR and payroll functions. Tech Solutions grew rapidly. Within 3 months, I was able to hire several of my former teammates. Jake, one of them, remarked during his first week, "This feels like Tech Solutions used to, but better." As Tech Solutions' quality continued to decline, more business came our way. Their incoming work dwindled to almost nothing. In less than 6 months, they went from being the top provider in the region to barely staying afloat. Recently, I learned that Sarah is now job hunting. She actually applied for a position at Alex's company. Alex jokingly suggested, "What if we bring her in for an interview, and you're the interviewer? You could ask her, 'How replaceable am I now?'" I laughed but shook my head. As tempting as that is, we're better than that. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah's entire retirement plan had hinged on selling Tech Solutions. Now she was starting over, searching for employment under someone else. The moral of the story? Don't tell your employees they're replaceable. They might just create a competing business that's better than yours, taking your best employees and clients, leaving you with no business to sell, and forcing you to start from scratch. In the end, it wasn't me who was replaceable. It was Tech Solutions. The next one is an entitled People's Story. I never thought I'd have to deal with an homeowner association living out here on my ranch, but boy was I wrong. My name's Jack, and I've owned this 50-acre piece of land just outside of town for about 15 years now. It's been in my family for generations, and I love the peace and quiet out here. That all changed when some developer bought up a bunch of land next door and started building one of those fancy gated communities. At first, I didn't pay it much mind. Live and let live, right? But then they formed an homeowner association, and that's when the trouble started. See, there's this old wooden bridge that crosses the creek separating my property from theirs. It's been there longer than I've been alive, and my grandpa used to tell stories about helping build it as a kid. That bridge is the only way to access the back 40 acres of my ranch where I keep most of my cattle. One day I'm out checking on the herd when I see this woman in a fancy SUV pull up to the bridge. She gets out and starts taking pictures, looking all huffy. I ride over on my horse to see what's going on. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I ask, trying to be polite. She whirls around, her face all pinched up like she smelled something bad. "Are you the owner of this property?" she asks, waving her hand around like my ranch offends her. "Yes, ma'am, I am. Name's Jack. What seems to be the problem?" "Well, Jack," she says my name like it's a cuss word, "I'm Karen, the president of the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association. This bridge is an eyesore and a safety hazard. It needs to come down immediately." I just blink at her for a second, not sure I heard right. "Ma'am, this bridge has been here for over 70 years. It's on my property and I need it to access my land. It ain't coming down." Karen's face turns red. "Now you listen here. Our community has standards to uphold. This decrepit old bridge is lowering our property values. As homeowner association president, I have the authority to have it removed." I can feel my temper rising, but I try to keep calm. "Ma'am, I don't know what gave you that idea, but you have no authority here. This is my land, and I'm not part of your homeowner association. Now I'm gonna have to ask you to leave." She huffs and puffs, but finally gets back in her car and drives off. I figured that was the end of it, but boy was I wrong. A couple days later, I'm heading out to check on the herd again when I hear the sound of heavy machinery. I ride over to the bridge, and I can't believe my eyes. There's a whole construction crew there with excavators and trucks, and they're tearing down my bridge. I gallop over, yelling for them to stop. The workers look confused, but they shut off their machines. Then I see her, Karen, standing there with a smug look on her face. "What in tarnation do you think you're doing?" I shout, jumping off my horse. "I told you this bridge was coming down," Karen says, all haughty-like. "The Homeowner Association Board voted unanimously to remove this hazard. And I told you you have no authority here." I'm so mad I can barely see straight. "This is my property. You're trespassing and destroying my property. I'm calling the sheriff right now." Karen just laughs. "Go ahead. I have all the proper permits and paperwork. This bridge is as good as gone." I pull out my cell phone and call the sheriff's office. While I'm waiting for them to arrive, I try to reason with the construction crew. Most of them seem unsure about the whole thing, but their foreman says they're just following orders. It takes about 20 minutes for Sheriff Thompson to get out here. By that time, half the bridge is already gone. I explain the situation to him, showing him the property lines on some old surveys I keep in the truck. The sheriff listens, then turns to Karen. "Ma'am, do you have permission from the property owner to be doing this work?" Karen puffs up like a bullfrog. "I don't need his permission. I have the authority of the homeowner association behind me. Here are all the permits and paperwork." She shoves a stack of papers at the sheriff. Sheriff Thompson looks through them, his frown getting deeper. Finally, he hands them back to Karen. "Ma'am, these permits are for work within the boundaries of your homeowner association. This bridge is clearly outside those boundaries, on Mr. Anderson's property. You have no authority here." Karen's face goes white, then red. But, the property values, the safety hazard." "None of that matters," the sheriff says firmly. "You're trespassing and destroying private property. I'm going to have to ask you and this crew to leave immediately." Karen starts sputtering, but the sheriff isn't having it. He tells the construction crew to pack up and go and escorts Karen off my property. As she's leaving, she turns and yells, "This isn't over! You'll be hearing from our lawyers!" I was pretty shaken up, but relieved it was over. Or so I thought. True to her word, about a week later I get served with papers. The homeowner association is suing me, claiming the bridge is a public nuisance and demanding it be torn down. I take the papers to my lawyer Bill, who's been handling my family's affairs for years. He reads through them and just shakes his head. "Jack, this is ridiculous," he says. "They have no case. The bridge is entirely on your property and you're not subject to their homeowner association rules, but we're going to have to fight this in court." So that's what we did. It took months and I had to spend a bunch of money I didn't really have on lawyer fees. But finally, we got our day in court. Karen and her fancy city lawyer tried to argue that the bridge was unsafe and lowering property values. They even brought in some so-called expert who claimed the bridge could collapse at any moment. But Bill was ready for them. He presented maintenance records showing I'd kept the bridge in good repair. He had a structural engineer testify that the bridge was sound, and he showed how the homeowner association's own bylaws didn't give them any authority beyond their own boundaries. The judge listened to both sides, then didn't waste any time giving his ruling. He dismissed the homeowner association's case entirely, saying they had no standing to dictate what happens on my property. He also ordered them to pay for the damage they'd done to my bridge. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Her lawyer tried to argue, but the judge shut him down fast. It was over, and we'd won. As we were leaving the courthouse, Karen came storming up to me. "This isn't over," she hissed. "We'll appeal. We'll change the laws. That bridge is coming down one way or another." I just looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, I've tried to be neighborly, but you're pushing it. That bridge stays. And if you or anyone from your homeowner association sets foot on my property again without permission, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Are we clear?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Finally, she just turned and stomped off. It's been a few months now and things have quieted down. I used the money from the judgment to not just repair the bridge, but reinforce it. It's stronger than ever now. I hear through the grapevine that a lot of folks in that fancy community weren't too happy about all the money Karen wasted on lawyers. Last I heard, there was talk of a recall vote to remove her as homeowner association president. As for me, I'm just glad to have my peace and quiet back, and every time I cross that bridge to check on my herd, I can't help but smile thinking about how that old wood and steel stood up to the homeowner association just as strong as I did. The next one is a petty revenge story. So my neighbors are mad at me, most likely because I called the cops on them while they were having a screaming argument that I could hear through the shared wall. In my defense, I'd heard them read that as at least once a week, times before, and I'd never done anything, but this time I heard one of them scream, "Somebody call cop," so I did. They've been quiet since. Now to the revenge. Our houses share a wall and a strip of lawn between us. It's not very wide, so whenever one of us is mowing the grass, normally we just mow the whole strip since it only takes about 10 minutes. Since the whole cop calling debacle, they've only mowed their half of the strip. Which, fine, whatever. If they want to be petty, I can be pettier after all. I put up with their screaming matches for a long time. So if they mow vertical, I go horizontal, or vice versa. The resulting mismatch of patterns in the grass is quite bizarre to look at. It's extremely petty, because I know the neighbors like everything to look nice and neat, and I know that the mismatched lawn stripes drive them crazy. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Before I became a manager at another location, I worked in a store and we had a mechanic who had done something which was stupid and against the rules, but it turned into being blown out of all proportion. He was out on a road test in a customer's car after finishing some work and he stopped off in a shop to buy something. It was against the rules to use customers' cars for personal use, even on a road test. His manager was fairly new to the role, and the mechanic knew he was going to be in trouble but did not think it would be a big deal. As in the past, it would most likely be a telling off as a verbal warning or possibly a written warning. This mechanic was very good and very productive and made them lots of money, so they could not afford to get rid of him. However, the new manager decided that he would go all official and hold a full disciplinary meeting. The mechanic asked me if I would act as someone to go in with him, take notes, etc., which was allowed. Beforehand, though, I did try and speak to the manager and suggest this could all be dealt with. However, he said he was following the process and expected everyone to do the same. I then spoke to the mechanic and got the background and what had gone on in the investigation meeting beforehand, which I realized had been mishandled also. The next day, there was an office with 2 people from HR who had traveled a long way to this meeting. I said to the mechanic, "Just go along with it as I indicate." So the HR people and the manager are there, and so are both of us, and the manager starts to go off about what had happened and that he had been seen by the customer stopping off to buy a drink in the local shop. He then went on about rules and procedures, and this went on and on. At the end of it, I asked if we could take a break for a bit, which they agreed to, and then we went back, and to make the point, he decided to bring in another mechanic to confirm they knew the policy, which he said he did, and I said that I could not be sure that everyone did, so one by one they brought each mechanic up and asked them, and also started on did they know what the accused had done, etc., etc. Fully smug at what the manager had proved, I again asked for a break as this had been going on for some time. Of course, HR agreed, and I made them wait a goof 20 minutes before we went back. At this point, one of the HR people were getting frustrated at the amount of time this was taking and then asked the mechanic, "So what do you have to say for yourself? You did know the rules, and you did stop off." "Yes," said the mechanic. "I know it was wrong, and I am sorry for breaking the rules." The HR person looked stunned and said, "So why did you say you did not?" "I never did," said the mechanic. "At no point did he ask me if I had done it, only that he had to follow the process." At which point the second HR person said, "No one asked you what you had to say about it?" "No, he did not," the mechanic answered. At that point they did not look best pleased. I was trying hard not to laugh at it all, and looked down at my notes so they could not see my face. The HR person said, "Well, a verbal warning would go on the file, not to do it again, and we could leave the room, and they thanked me for my taking part." We all got up to leave, but they said to the manager to stay behind, and I closed the door and listened while I could hear them giving the manager a hard time over the waste of time. The next day when the manager run off the productivity report, it was really bad, as all the time lost by the other mechanics while they gave their evidence. I would have loved to see him have to explain that one to his bosses. He avoided HR where possible after that, and never asked me to follow the process again. The next one is an entitled people's story. I, 38M, have been married to Mike, 35M, for 3 years, together for 12 years. We are very quiet, nerdy, nature-loving guys, not into flashy displays or drama at all. It was the tail end of the pandemic, and since the borders were partially open, we decided to road trip to Gibraltar and elope. The pandemic was a great excuse not to invite anyone to our wedding and just do what we wanted. When we told our lesbian friends Di, 45F, and Anne, 60F, what we were doing, they decided on the spot that we were going to have a double wedding and immediately started taking over, suggesting a bunch of trashy, expensive things we didn't want. This is the story of how they attempted to ruin our wedding and only ruin theirs. We initially decided that we'd get a rental car together and split it 4 ways, with Mike and Di splitting the driving. A month before the wedding, Di and Anne decided it'd be cheaper to take the train, well, 6 trains actually, across 3 countries. I immediately said no, and it turned out Di didn't even have her driver's license and had been driving illegally for years. Mike offered to do all the driving if they split the rental car with us. They declined because it was too expensive and took the train instead. Obviously, it went terribly for them. Trains were canceled, tickets were lost, and they missed out on an entire night in Gibraltar because they were stuck at a random train station in the Spanish countryside. Mike and I had a wonderful road trip and spent a magical night in an Airbnb in Cartagena on the way. Their train tickets cost more than half of the rental car. We initially agreed to get a really fancy Airbnb in Gibraltar with a hot tub and all that stuff. Split 4 ways, we could get something really nice. Well, Anne decided she wanted a real hotel and pulled out of the Airbnb plan. I found a gorgeous little 1-bedroom place for us with a hot tub and a view of the sea. Di and Anne forgot to book a real hotel and ended up in a freaking awful place by the port, like a place for merchant sailors to crash while they're in port. It was on a busy roundabout opposite Burger King. There was no bath, no balcony, and it was basic AF. It was more expensive than our lovely place. They got no sleep because of the drunk sailors and traffic noise. They didn't even get any towels provided. The night before the wedding, we met for dinner. They'd barely been in Gibraltar for 2 hours, whereas we'd been relaxing since the day before. At dinner, things were tense, but Di was really trying. At some point, she signaled to the restaurant host, and the lady came over with a super fancy VIP bucket with champagne on ice. She popped the cork and gave it to Di, who handed it to Anne, saying, "Just like the one I gave you in New York, baby." It was clearly supposed to be a romantic moment. Anne refused the cork, and we all smiled nervously to try and smooth things over. The host poured 2 glasses of the champagne and gave the glasses to Di and Anne. Anne took a sip and immediately spat it out, announcing loudly, "It's corked!" We all tried the champagne and told her it was delicious. Mike and I don't really drink, but we know what champagne tastes like. Anne insisted the champagne was corked and loudly announced they wouldn't be paying for it. The host was pissed, and I understood why when she told us it was a $750 bottle. She threatened to call the police, so Di sheepishly paid for it. Anne sulked the rest of the night. I was so embarrassed, and our whole evening was spoiled. When we got back to our Airbnb to take a bubble bath and eat Jaffa cakes, I told Mike there was no way I was going to allow them to ruin another minute of our trip, but if they wanted to ruin theirs, that wasn't my problem. The actual weddings went off okay, apart from the fact they were still drunk from the night before. The registry office was nice, and I married the man of my dreams. Afterwards, we bought them brunch to soak up the booze and faithfully walked them around the park, taking lovely photos of them. Dee had her finger over the lens of every picture she took of us. When we were done, they suggested we all go to the pub and get wasted, as if. We dropped them off at the pub and went our separate ways. I was honest and just told them, I want to be alone with my husband. They couldn't really argue with that. The wedding dinner. Mike, Di, and I all had fairly casual preferences for a restaurant for the wedding dinner, but Anne insisted on a fine dining fish restaurant that didn't even serve dessert. I outright refused. I don't eat fish at all. And Anne was insisting on the fish restaurant, so we decided not to meet up. Anne also tried to convince us to chip in $200 for a custom wedding cake to get delivered to the restaurant, but we said hell no. Mike and I went to the best steakhouse in Gibraltar. I had a 1.2 kilo steak and an amazing cheesecake for dessert. We had a lovely time and the waitstaff went out of their way to spoil us. Around 8 p.m. they messaged us, "Where are you?" And we ignored the message. As it turned out, Anne forgot to make reservations, and the fish restaurant was fully booked, but they couldn't leave and go somewhere else because they had to wait for the cake to be delivered. They ended up taking the cake back to their crappy hotel and eating it with their credit cards because they didn't even have cutlery and plates in their room. They got hammered that night on supermarket vodka. Mike and I had the perfect evening. We got a taxi home, smoked weed on our balcony, watched the stars, and kissed for hours. The next day, Mike and I set out for a day of hiking in the UNESCO World Heritage Site National Park. It was the best day ever. Mike got robbed and bitten by a monkey, which was fucking hilarious. We ate a full English breakfast in the Sky restaurant and explored St. Michael's Cave. Unforgettable memories were made. Dee and Anne fought, decided it was Gibraltar's fault, and spontaneously decided to leave. They booked a beach resort up the coast somewhere in Spain and headed on foot to the train station. The trains were all messed up, they got stranded somewhere in Spain with all their luggage, and it took them 14 hours to get to the resort. They arrived at 11 p.m. and were checking out the next morning. Mike and I spent a few more nights enjoying our honeymoon and then road tripped home. We stayed in the same little place in Cartagena on the way back, and the hosts threw us a little surprise party. It was magical. Di and Anne got stranded again on the way home, lost half their luggage, and caught COVID. The next one is an entitled people's story. It had been a tumultuous journey living next to my neighbor, an individual who seemed to thrive on disregarding boundaries and asserting his dominance over everything in sight. From trespassing on my property to commandeering parking spots, he reveled in a twisted sense of entitlement. However, my patience had reached its limit, and I was determined to teach him a lesson in respect. As fortune would have it, circumstances aligned in my favor when my work shifted to a remote setting, granting me an opportunity to witness my neighbor's comings and goings throughout the day. Each time he left the vicinity, I swiftly relocated my car to a spot precisely between our houses. It was a subtle yet deliberate act to convey the significance of sharing public parking spaces. Predictably, my neighbor was infuriated by my actions. He stormed towards me, his face twisted with anger and frustration. "Neighbor, you're parked in my spot again." Me. "There are no designated spots. It's street parking available to all residents. This has been made clear to you before." Neighbor. "You have no respect for my property." Me. "I am not on your property, unlike you, who continuously trespasses on mine without permission. If you expect respect, you should extend the same courtesy by staying off my lawn." Hoping that my message would finally resonate with him, I retreated indoors. Unfortunately, what ensued surpassed any expectation of escalation. From inside my home, I heard an ominous and unmistakable sound: a chainsaw. Rushing outside, I was greeted by a horrifying sight. My neighbor brandishing a chainsaw, its teeth biting into my car's driver's side door. Glass shattered, seats were shredded, and even the gear shift met a brutal fate. To my disbelief, he wore a chilling smile throughout the destructive act, relishing in his deranged actions. Onlookers gathered, their fear preventing them from intervening as he posed an immediate threat with the menacing chainsaw. Fortunately, someone had the presence of mind to summon the police. The authorities swiftly arrived, ordering my neighbor to cease his destructive spree and place the chainsaw on the ground. Complying reluctantly, he was promptly apprehended and taken away in the back of a police car. The evidence against him was overwhelming, leaving him no choice but to plead guilty to his wanton act of vandalism. Ultimately, justice prevailed as he was sentenced to a year in jail and compelled to compensate me for the damages inflicted upon my car. Despite the potential for parole, I remained vigilant, safeguarding myself and my property by obtaining a restraining order against him. With his impending release, I could breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that he would no longer reside beside me. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I grew up on a country road with 4 houses. Our mailboxes were on the main road. Someone kept vandalizing the 4 mailboxes by driving through them and breaking the posts. I recall replacing the mailboxes a few times on weekends. After 4 to 5 times, my dad and the neighbors hatched a plan. My dad told me to go to bed early because we had a lot of work to do in the morning. After breakfast, we went to the mailbox, and there were the other 3 neighbors and their sons, along with a tractor with a post hole digger, railroad ties, cement, and a mini mixer. We proceeded to dig 2 very deep holes. Digging holes was very backbreaking where I lived, as the land was in a very rocky region. We only dug about 6 inches before we had to dig out a bunch of rocks from the hole. We took turns digging out the rocks throughout the entire morning. There was a lot of motivation, as this was the last time we were going to fix the mailboxes. We dug 2 holes, each 6 feet deep, and hoisted 2 uncut 12-foot railroad ties into each hole. We then proceeded to fill each hole to the top with cement. We added a crossbeam and attached our new mailboxes. After an entire day of digging holes and pouring concrete, we all sat back and enjoyed our handiwork. A month went by, and the kids and I walked to the mailbox to meet the bus. We discovered what happens when a moving car meets an immovable object. There was an old blue Buick Century with a smashed-up grille and a bent wheel, and nobody in the car. This was well before cell phones, so we ran to the closest house and told the mom what we saw. We went back to the main road and got on the bus with the car still there. We found out later that the highway ticketed the driver, a 14-year-old kid, and towed the vehicle. Now, where I grew up, you could get a daytime driver's license at 14. One catch: if you received 2 violations over 2 years, you lost your license until you turned 16 years old. The kid was ticketed for speeding a week prior. Oops, he now lost his license for 1.5 years. Insurance found out about the vandalism and refused to pay the claim, then put the insurance plan in the high-risk category, even when the kid couldn't drive. The kid's dad tried to fight it by saying the mailboxes were not legally built. Turns out, mailbox construction is set by the state and county, and our state county did not have any regulations on county mailboxes. I smile every time I go home. After 30 years, the indestructible mailboxes are still standing. The next one is a petty revenge story. My child's daycare had a death in the family. It's a small family-owned place, so this affected all the employees. They sent out an email at around 3 a.m. I couldn't miss work as I had a very important day, so I scrambled to find a sitter just for that day. My stepbrother's girlfriend was basically the only person I know who doesn't work, so I called her. She said, "Sure, but I can only watch him for 6 hours and I'll give you my family rate, so it will only be $200. I asked if she was serious. She assured me she was, and that this was her livelihood, and she takes it very seriously. That she was already offering me a family discount. Please note that it was not her livelihood. My stepbrother has a great job and has always paid for everything. He has tried to get her to do anything to earn money, but she refuses to work and believes he should support her fully, including daily Starbucks, hair, nails, designer stuff, etc. Please also note that I had done a lot for this girl, just to help her out. The list is long. I agreed only because I would have lost my job if I hadn't gone to work that day. I paid her $200, which she demanded up front, to work for a little over 4 hours after factoring in the commute. Fast forward a couple of years. They have separated, they have a kid, and she is living for free in his dad's extra house, and driving my dad's extra car for free. The ex pays all the bills and necessities. She finally breaks down and gets a job because he stopped paying for her hair, nails, etc. She has a day when her childcare falls through and sends out the same request I did. "Can anyone watch my kid? I have to go to work or I'll get fired." I told her I could absolutely do it. Then I charged her the same bogus price she charged me. I told her it was the family rate. She cussed me out. Edit. Why would either of us get fired has been asked a ton. Here's why. I was scheduled to teach a seminar for about 400 people. This was extremely expensive to the company once you factor in all the logistics of closing operations for a day, etc. If I had last minute canceled, it would have cost them twice as much. Under normal circumstances, I can miss work for an emergency, but not during something like that. I'm a salaried employee, so I usually work about 60 hours a week. Taking off after lunch or something isn't a big deal. It was just the magnitude of the event. She worked a job that anyone was qualified for and was on the chopping block for missing work all the time. Also, it was not her livelihood. At some point before she got with my stepbrother, she was babysitting for a family for a couple of weeks, but they fired her for being unreliable. She recognized the position I was in and threw out a number because she knew I had no choice but to pay it. The next one is an entitled people story. Not me, thankfully, but a good friend. He had come into some money, so after setting aside a college fund for his kids, he's divorced. He decided to buy himself a toy in the form of a new Tesla SUV. Even though charging stations are popping up everywhere, he decided to install one in his garage so he wouldn't have to go all over the place. He got the station installed, got his car, and life went on. Enter one of his neighbors, whom we'll call, I don't know, Karen. Karen and her hubby had an older model Tesla and, like most people, used the public chargers for their car. One day, my friend came home to find Karen angrily trying to open his garage door. When he somewhat politely asked what the hell she was doing, she told him she needed to use the public charging station for her car, and that he was illegally blocking her access by keeping his garage door locked. When he told her that the charger was his personal one, she angrily rebuked him by saying that all Tesla chargers were public property and that he was breaking the law by blocking his. I actually checked on this, and a home Tesla charging station only costs a few grand. He politely told her to F off, put his car in the garage, and close the door. A little while later, there was a knock on the door, and he opened it to find a cop with a smug-looking Karen standing behind him. The cop explained that he was responding to a blocking access to public property complaint. It took him a second, but then he took the cop, who seemed embarrassed to be there, to his garage, showed him his car and the charger, and showed him the invoice for the charging station. The cop nodded, went outside, had a conversation with Karen, who screeched something unintelligible. End of story, right? Well, one day my friend comes home to find his garage door half bashed in to the point he can't open the damn thing. He then does what any normal person would. He looked at the security feed from the cameras he had for his house. And there, in HD, was Karen psychotically hammering at his garage door with a small sledge. He calls the cops, and Karen is hauled out of her home and is facing charges of attempted break and enter and damaging private property. Oh, and my friend is suing her for damages to his home, just to plug in her damn car. The next one is an entitled parent story. I, 27F, got into it with my mother today, and I don't think our relationship will ever be the same after this one. To be honest, our relationship has always been rocky for years, but I tried to make it better after moving out a few years ago. We got into it because my niece, 13, came out as a lesbian, and she was mad because, well, to be honest, my mom's a homophobe, which got worse after I moved out because she became excessively religious. I said something like, "Oh, well, it is what it is," when she told me, and she did not like that. She started going on and on about how, no, it's not. It's the devil working in her, and I can't bring myself to see her again. That shocked me because I knew how my mom is, but to just disown her only grandchild like that struck a nerve with me. I then said, "So just because niece is who she is, you want to not see her again? You've been in her life since birth. How could you?" She then skipped over that and said something like, "Well, I'm mad because I told her that's not how we are in the family. And your sister pissed me off because, well, you and your sister are pissing me off because you're acting like this isn't a big deal. Niece isn't gay. She just thinks that because of something she saw on social media." She then went on to talk about how God made men for women and vice versa, saying that we're letting the devil work in our lives. I then said, God made us all in his image, right? If homosexuality was something he didn't agree with at all, then he should be able to make it so it wasn't a thing, right? She tried to say that it was the devil, but I cut her off with, "So you're saying that someone who devotes themselves to God, prays every day, worships and praises him in his name, is still letting the devil work through them? People don't choose to be gay, lesbian, etc. And niece is no different. She's still niece, and her preference and attraction don't change that. TW ahead. Brief talk of thoughts of suicide." Then my mom said this, and it just hit that nerve that I tried to ignore for years. "I'm your mother. You are who I tell you to be." Why did this strike a nerve? Well, my mother has been controlling over me for years. Growing up, it was on and off, but when I became an adult, she kicked it into full gear. Yelling at me, making me do things, controlling my money, not letting me drive, not letting me go anywhere, hitting me. And basically did everything she could to make me feel like I was the size of a rice grain. Hell, just the other day she told me how I was different because I didn't ask permission to move out, unlike my sister that asked, which I doubt by the way. I was 23, engaged, and tired of getting treated like I was nothing under her roof. So my husband and his mom helped me by moving me in with them. I can honestly say that if I stayed any longer, I would have probably taken my own life. That one statement made me realize that my mom wasn't just absent-mindedly controlling, she was fully in control of making me feel like an object. I don't know how to explain it, but it just made me feel worse. She then said, "If this is how you're gonna be, then I don't want to talk to you ever again either." So I took a deep breath and said, "Well, if it's like that, then I should tell you that I've been bisexual since I was 12 years old, and that never changed." She lost her crap. She hung up and texted me, my sister, and my niece in a group chat, actual copy and paste. "You three can just come over and stick a knife in my heart. Really, are you all trying to kill me? I'm so hurt right now." My sister said not to bring my niece into this chat, and then Mom continued, "The devil is so busy, but keep on entertaining him. Listen, niece's mommy, I don't give a flying duck." There was some more, but she messaged me privately and told me to leave her alone, and this is where I'm at now. So yeah, I came out to support my niece, and honestly, it felt good to stand up for myself for once. My anxiety is going crazy at the moment, but I don't regret what I said or did. Unfortunately, I'm sure my mom will die on this hill. Small update. Mom seems to have calmed down a little. But the first thing she texted me was a scripture and told me to repent, which was expected. I decided not to poke the bull, so I was honest as I wanted to be. I told her that I can say without a drop of doubt that God is pleased with me. Note, I'm not traditionally religious, but more or less a spiritualist. I basically believe that there's a little truth in all beliefs, even atheism, because I have been blessed with joy that I haven't felt until after I moved away. I told her how I loved her, but I was afraid of her for most of my life, to the point that I couldn't come to her for anything, due to the fear of her reaction. She then did the classic parent speech of how I was fed and clothed, and how I should be grateful because she didn't kill any of us by being a mean mother, and tried to justify her hitting and yelling at me by trying to make sure that I didn't ruin my life. Let me just say that I wasn't a classic rebellious child or teenager. She said that I was messy and always forgetful with things, so I guess that warranted a slap and getting choked. Never mind that I was going through mental health struggles at that point in time and all that, I guess. But she never had an answer for when I was grown and had a job and was doing the right thing and still getting slapped for who knows what reason. I know for a fact that if I were in her presence, I'd be getting my ass beat and not this "we need to pray" attitude. I'm going to go talk to my sister and niece now to see what they are up to, and if they are okay. The next one is an entitled Parents' Story. When I was 17, I bought a used minibike and used it to get to and from a part-time job. Those who've read my previous posts know what my little brother is like. The boy my parents extra coddled because he was diagnosed as high-functioning autistic, and anything I had, my brother had to have too. And if I refused to give it, my parents generally took it. At least until that behavior was exposed to the public when my parents tried to cancel my 14th birthday. After that, my parents stopped forcing me to give my stuff to my brother whenever he wanted it. And that led to some extra huge tantrums from him. My brother would look for things around the house to throw to the floor and break, usually dishes. My parents actually stocked up on plates from secondhand stores because of that. When I got the mini bike, my brother was upset I would never let him ride it. But he's destructive with all his stuff. Every time he broke his BMX, I'm the one who had to fix it. Change a flat, new pedals, a new tire, new handlebars, a new brake line, etc. He's got a stunt BMX that he begged for, and my parents spent hundreds on it. But as much as he loves it, he never fixes it himself or properly takes care of it. He just calls me over, begging me to fix it. My parents got him the parts and have the tools, but he never bothers to do anything more than pump up a tire. And even then, he usually tries to get someone to do it for him. He's also very careless about where he leaves the bike. He left it in a neighbor's driveway and its handlebars got run over by the neighbor's van. He somehow destroyed the pedals and a new pair had to be put on. He broke the rear brake line while having a tantrum too. The tire was understandable though, since those wear out. But it wasn't hard to swap it, and I shouldn't have had to come over on a Saturday to do it when my brother is perfectly capable of doing it himself. So damn right I'm not letting him take my Minibike on a joyride, especially with gas prices being so high these days. The Minibike gets like 60 mpg. So what that it only goes 40 miles per hour, I only have a 5-mile commute anyway. About a month before my brother's 14th birthday, my parents called me, begging me to come over and fix the BMX again. Little bro had worn the rear tire down to its threads. I was annoyed, but I came over anyway because they offered to pay me. I swapped the tire and sat down for a bottled water because it was like 100 degrees that day. My brother watched me work on the bike until I was done. His helmet was on, so I figured he was just waiting to go riding on his bike. But the moment my back was turned, I heard my Minibike start up outside and then take off. Little bro took off like a rocket down the street on it before I could get out of the garage. I freaked out, but my parents tried to play it off. Though when I didn't placate them, they said they'd get my Minibike back right away. But for them, that was more like just waiting till my brother came back with it. I was annoyed and I wanted to call the police, but I'm not sure if they'd call it a domestic issue or not. My brother finally came back an hour later. He'd somehow not crashed. But the moment he saw me, he took off again. He drove the bike till it ran out of gas, and my parents had to go get him. To say I was furious was an understatement. But my parents basically rolled their eyes, handed me $40, and claimed it wouldn't happen again. I said it better not, or I'd call the cops next time. Not sure if it'd help, but they seemed to take my warning. I had to push my Minibike to the nearest gas station to fill up before I could go home. Before I left, I told my parents that if my brother wants a Minibike so bad, then they should get him one. But then they pulled a 180 and said he wasn't ready to have one because it's a big responsibility, and that it was too dangerous because it's practically a motorcycle. I mean, really. They just let him steal mine for like 2 hours to go joyriding to God knows where, and they don't want to get him one themselves? Whatever. I'm used to their hypocrisy by now. The last time I went to my parents' house, my brother was massively grounded and in his room for his birthday rampage I mentioned in my first post. But just to be sure, I pulled the spark plug wire off my bike before I entered the house. My brother was glaring at me from his window when I left. I just gave him a goofy wave and drove off. The next one is an entitled people story, so for context, my sister's ex-boyfriend, let's call him NB for nice brother, and the father of her child passed away a couple of years ago. This story takes place at the funeral. Our families were very close, given that he was the father of my niece. Even though they broke up and my sister got married to someone else, we all cared for and valued him a lot. Now onto the entitled person. At the funeral, we were all sitting down when all of a sudden this lady pops up, runs to the casket that's about to be lowered, and starts bawling. It wasn't weird at this point since a lot of people were crying, but she was screaming. I didn't question it too much, but I did find it a little odd since I'd never seen her before. Fast forward to later in the funeral. The ceremony was done and we were all talking. My other sister, not the one who dated NB's sister, and I were having a conversation. I'm good friends with NB's sister since we're the same age and have the same interests. This will be important later. Suddenly we hear the entitled lady, EL, the one sobbing on his casket and causing a scene, talking to a friend of hers. Out of nowhere she says, "Yeah, I was actually going to get married to NB and take NB's kid from my sister, and we were going to move far, far away and live together." My sister and I exchanged a look that said, "What in the actual duck?" We had never seen her, and given how close we were with his family, we were shocked to hear this. I then asked NB's sister what she was talking about, and she said, funnily enough, "I've never seen that woman in my life. All I know is she was his coworker, and they barely talked. He was actually often annoyed by her constantly trying to ask him out. All in all, she was outcast by everyone there, including NB's family, for lying about their late family member." The next one is an entitled people's story. It's hard to believe, but it's true. I found myself entangled in a legal battle with my own homeowners association over the simple act of parking my pickup truck in my own driveway. Let me take you back to where it all began and provide some context. I live in a prestigious neighborhood filled with luxurious cars that embody the status and affluence of its residents. Naturally, I have a BMW that my wife primarily uses for transportation. However, being an electrician, I require a vehicle with ample space to carry my tools and equipment, and that's where my trusty pickup truck comes into the picture. When I first moved into the neighborhood, aware of the homeowners association's strict regulations, I promptly filled out the necessary forms and obtained permission to park my truck in the driveway. The permission had no expiration date specified, so I assumed I was within my rights to continue parking there. After all, isn't that the purpose of a driveway? To park one's vehicle regardless of its type? However, a few years later, an unexpected letter arrived from the homeowners association instructing me to cease parking my truck in the driveway. I was taken aback and wondered what they expected me to do. Squeezing it into the already packed garage, used mainly for storage, would have been impractical. It appeared that the homeowners association's concern revolved around maintaining a certain neighborhood aesthetic, an appearance of affluence that would supposedly attract the right kind of people. I couldn't help but find their rules discriminatory and unreasonable. What if a family required a large van to accommodate a member with a disability? Would the homeowners association deny them the right to park in their own driveway? Nevertheless, I decided to persist and continued parking my truck in my driveway, disregarding the angry letters that piled up in my mailbox. After all, it was my property, and my truck was neither causing harm nor offending anyone. Little did I know that those letters contained fines for my supposed infractions, which I carelessly discarded without paying much attention. Eventually, I received a letter, not from the homeowners association directly, but from their lawyers. To my surprise, I was being sued for unpaid fines and violating the bylaws. Instead of letting it go, they were taking the matter to court. The audacity astonished me. I had done nothing wrong, yet here I was, facing a legal battle over parking my truck on my own property. During the court proceedings, to my relief, the trial progressed much faster than I anticipated. The Homeowners Association. HOA's representatives candidly admitted that they considered the bylaws to imply that my truck should be parked in the garage. However, I argued that there was no explicit mention of trucks in the bylaws, rendering their interpretation baseless. The court ruled in my favor, and the Homeowners Association was obliged to cover my legal expenses, an exhilarating victory that I hoped would teach them a lesson. Yet instead of accepting defeat gracefully, the Homeowners Association decided to appeal the decision and escalate the case to a higher court. Throughout the period between the two trials, I continued to receive relentless letters from the Homeowners Association attempting to pressure and intimidate me. However, my lawyer advised me to maintain my distance until the case was resolved. Over a year passed before we returned to court, and this time I had an additional trump card up my sleeve. I unearthed the original application that had granted me permission to park my truck in the driveway, and it clearly showed no expiration date. As the same truck remained in my possession, this piece of evidence shattered the Homeowners Association's arguments. They could argue about the interpretation of the bylaws all they wanted, but they couldn't deny that I had official permission. In the end, justice prevailed, and the Homeowners Association's relentless pursuit came to an end. They were ordered to pay a hefty sum of $280,000, which covered my accumulated legal fees over the past year. It felt like a significant victory, but the bitter taste of the whole ordeal lingered. All I had fought for was the right to park my truck, something that any ordinary homeowner takes for granted. Unfortunately, the Homeowners Association didn't take their defeat gracefully. Seeking revenge, they decided to increase the annual Homeowners Association fees for the entire neighborhood, using it as a means to recoup their financial loss. However, this move sparked discontent among the well-off residents who were forced to shoulder the burden of their vindictiveness. The Homeowners Association subtly redirected the blame towards me, conveniently omitting the fact that they were the ones who instigated the lawsuit. Though a few neighbors understood my side of the story and stood by me, most distanced themselves from the controversy. The Homeowners Association. His actions tarnished my reputation, tarnishing my hard-fought victory. Nonetheless, I remain confident that their unjust actions won't go unnoticed or unpunished. The future holds the promise of delivering the retribution they rightfully deserve. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My SO and I were renting a ground floor unit at a really nice apartment complex. I wouldn't say it was a luxury apartment or anything, but our ground floor unit had a little patio off the back that led out into a really nice courtyard area with hammocks, a walking path, outdoor fireplace, seating area, etc. A lot of people walk their dogs out there or let their kids play out in the grass, including us. We have a 1-year-old cane corso. We got her when we'd been living in the unit for about 2.5 months, and she was only 8 weeks at the time. She's a really good dog, and we trained her well. We could let her out to go potty, and she'd come right back even if there were distractions /people/dogs out. We always stood on the patio and watched her anyways because our pet agreement said we couldn't leave our dog unattended. Then we'd go pick up her poop right away if she pooped. Also part of the pet agreement, as I'm sure is standard at most apartment complexes. We kept a small step trash can outside specifically for her poop bags because we didn't want to throw them away inside, and the only outside trash cans were on the other side of the building, which I agree is super dumb. It really was a small trash can, like the kind you'd tuck into the bathroom between the toilet and the wall. We also had her poop bags hanging on our patio door handle for easy access, so we didn't have to hunt for them every time we needed them. This lady and her kid moved in on the ground floor in our building, 2 units down from us. No biggie. We ran into her one day carrying in groceries, and my SO held open the door for her. She seemed kind of Karen-ish, but was polite, and her kid, probably 10, 11 years old, didn't look up from his phone. Whatever, that's pretty typical of kids these days. They also had a dog, a little black and white fluffy thing, super cute, but not trained very well. Don't know what kind of dog, but it was much smaller than our already giant puppy. After about 2 weeks or so, we realized that there were dog turds in the grass right off our patio. We found out the hard way because my boyfriend stepped in it the first time. Luckily, he wasn't barefoot. They were clearly not our dog's turds as one. We always picked up her poop right after she went in 2. They were very obviously from a small dog, not our 70-pound puppy. We'd been in the apartment about 7, 8 months at that point, and had never had an issue with this, so we figured it was EM's little dog. I wrote her a polite note that basically was like, "Hey neighbor, we noticed that some of your dog's poops aren't being picked up and are right off our patio. Per the pet agreement we all have to sign, we all need to be picking up our own dog's poop each time they go. I'm sure it was an accident and you just didn't notice, so if you could make sure to do that going forward, we'd appreciate it. Your neighbor's in Unit Hash." She wasn't home, so I slipped it under the door and went back to my apartment. A couple hours later, this lady is banging on my door and gets really angry with me, insists that it couldn't have been her dog, and how dare I assume. I felt really bad, and I apologized immediately, said I didn't mean to offend her and it must have been someone else. She told me never to bother her with crap like this again, and stormed off. I was like, okay. Not 3 days later, I was sitting on my patio with a book enjoying the cool weather when I see their little dog run out of their back door, no one with it, and it comes over to me. I said hello to the pup, because I love pups, and then it took a crap right off patio, ran back home and scratched the door to be let in. I saw her kid slide the door open enough to let the dog in and then closed it again without coming outside to pick up the poop. I was annoyed because here I saw it with my own eyes that it was their dog, and no one was even watching it when it was outside. So I grabbed a poop bag, picked up the poop, wrote another less polite note about her kid neglecting to watch the dog or come to check if it had pooped pick up after it, and dropped the poop bag and the note on their patio right by the door, then went back to my reading. EM was quicker to come by this time and stomped right up to me, waving the note around, then stated that her kid was just a kid and probably just forgot to check. I said I didn't care. Her kid was old enough to stand outside for 3 minutes and come pick up the dog's poop. She said, well, there's no poop bags, trash cans on this side of the building, and she didn't feel comfortable making her kid walk all the way around the building for that. The next part is my own fault, in hindsight. I suggested she put a trash can like mine on her patio and leave their own poop bags handy like we do for our dog. She eyed our stuff, huffed some more, rolled her eyes, refused to do anything about the poop, and walked off. At this point, I was super annoyed. I stalked my patio door for the next couple days as much as I could, just waiting. And sure enough, on day 2 in the evening when I was about to give up, I see the puppy run outside towards my patio. I whipped out my phone, took some pictures of the dog outside alone, not allowed, and the dog pooping, and then took another phone an hour later of the poop still there and time-stamped all of them. Then I sent an email to the apartment office people who were always pretty nice, and they responded quickly they would give her a warning about it. And sure enough, this lady comes back again to get mad and yell at me about how petty I was to report them to the office, and now they had a $150 fine for not picking up their dog poop. It's worth noting that these fines were rare. Poop prints were not used at this complex. In order for the office to fine someone for dog poop, they had to have proof it was that specific tenant's dog's poop, and that it wasn't picked up. Hence the photos I'd taken and time-stamped. I told her that I had tried to be nice about it with her twice before, and it was her own fault at that point for not abiding by the terms of the pet agreement we all had to sign, everyone who had a dog at least. She went off about how she's a single mom and she works during the day and her precious baby can't be expected to pick up after their dog. I told her that a 10-11-year-old was plenty old enough to pick up after a dog, and that if they weren't responsible enough, then maybe the kid shouldn't be letting the dog out at all and she should be the one to do it. Or maybe whoever is home with him should be looking after it. She got angry, told me I had no idea how to be a single mom, that her mom stays with him during the day and shouldn't be expected to look after her kid and her dog, and she stomped off again. I expected to hear more about it, but I didn't. The ironic part is, I am a single mom. My kid isn't my SO's, and I raised him alone for 2.5 years before I met my SO. So yes, I do know how hard it is, and I live 1,000 miles from my closest family, so I never even had the luxury of being able to have my mom watch my kid. Over the next couple of weeks, we didn't find any more dog turds off our patio, but we did notice our poop bags were depleting and our trash can filling up way more quickly than usual. I had my suspicions and wanted to test it. We had recently bought some small security cameras for inside of our apartment for different reasons, and I had my boyfriend set one up outside on the patio. We faced it where it could see our door and trash can but didn't point to the rest of the courtyard or other people's units. We respect privacy around here. Sure enough, the same evening my boyfriend set it up, I see the kid walk onto our patio, take a poop bag, walk out of frame, and then come back to throw it in our trash can. Okay, now I'm pissed, but also not trying to fight this lady or her kid. So I moved the poop bags to the inside door handle. It's a glass door so you can still see them, but we always lock our sliding door. Next morning I hear someone knocking on the back patio door and I go to see her kid standing there looking annoyed. I didn't open the door, I just spoke loudly enough to ask what did he need. He demanded a poop bag for his dog's poop. I said I'm sorry, but these are our poop bags for our dog, and they weren't free for anyone else to use. The apartment provides poop bags in a dispenser near the trash can on the other side of the building. Kid started demanding a poop bag, saying his mom told him he could use ours, slapping his hands on the glass a few times, trying to scare me. Yes, I'm so terrified of a 10-year-old boy. And finally screaming at me that he's telling his mother on me. I said, fine, go ahead, I'll tell her the same thing. Sure enough, a few minutes later, his mom is standing on my patio also demanding a poop bag for her dog's poop. I denied her a bag and asked her to please step off of my patio as she was making me feel unsafe and uncomfortable. My SO wasn't home. She told me I was a bratty child, I'm 24, and she demanded I let her use my poop bags as I had already told her she could before. I said no, I told you to get some yourself and do what I do. Keep them close by and put your own trash can on your own patio. Not use the bags I buy with my own money for my own dog, and then fill up my tiny trash can with your dog's poop. I pointed out she could use a plastic shopping bag if she didn't want to buy her own poop bags, or she could use the bags the complex provided on the other side of the building. She kept going off on me, and I finally told her if she didn't leave my patio, I'd call the police as she was harassing me. The apartment office was closed on Sundays, and of course it was Sunday. She acted like she was going to call my bluff, but then my boyfriend got home and walked up behind me to ask what was going on, and she ended up dragging her kid away, again, leaving the poop in the grass off my patio. So once she was gone, I took another time-stamped picture of the dog poop, downloaded the footage from my security camera of her kid stealing my poop bags and throwing them in my trash can, and the footage from them that morning yelling at me and demanding my bags and my denying them, and emailed all of it to the apartment management. I told them that she made me feel unsafe and uncomfortable in my own home, that she and her child felt entitled to come onto my patio and take my belongings. I also went outside, picked up her dog's poop, looked in the trash can on my patio, and pulled out the bags with her dog's poop. They were significantly smaller than my dog's poops, as I'm sure any dog owners could tell the difference in poops of a 12 lb dog versus a 70 lb dog. I went and opened all the bags and dumped the poops straight on her patio right outside the door. On Monday, I heard back from the office lady who said she would take care of it. By Friday, there was a moving truck and the lady and her kid were moving out. Pretty sure they were evicted or at the very least urged to move before a formal eviction process was initiated. After talking to some of our other, much friendlier neighbors, it turns out we weren't the only ones who had been complaining about her. They'd only lived in the complex for like 3 months before they made so many enemies they were kicked out. Sometimes I think I should feel bad for playing a part in them getting evicted, but honestly I can't bring myself to feel guilty about it. Not my fault she was a lazy entitled idiot who couldn't even be asked to get a shopping bag to pick up her dog's crap. I never heard from her about the turds I dropped on her patio, but I like to think she stepped in them without looking and knew better than to come idiot to me about it. Sorry, not sorry. Also, I'm sure they were given more than a week to vacate as those are the tenancy laws here, but she packed up and left like a bat out of hell. Guess she didn't want to stay somewhere she was clearly seen as an enemy. I don't know for sure that she was evicted, or if she was just asked to leave or abide by the lease or what. Office can't give out that type of info, and she and I weren't exactly on speaking terms for her to give me the scoop about it. The next one is an entitled people story. I am visually impaired. I have no sight in one eye and very little sight in the other, but I can see a little. I walk with a white cane, but generally need some help to get around. I was at the airport in Cincinnati. Returning from a business trip, and I asked the person helping me to take me to a Starbucks since I was desperate for caffeine. She put me in line, then said she would be back for me in 20 minutes. So I'm standing in line when this woman starts creeping on my right, then a little more, and a little more. She was trying to cut in front of me. Oh, I don't think so. So I slyly slid my cane over to my right, effectively preventing her from cutting in front of me. She realizes she's been caught and huffs a bit. Her plan of cutting in front of an undercaffeinated blind person at 6:45 a.m. effectively thwarted. I get my drink and take a seat. Most people just took their drinks to their gate, so most of the tables were empty. Then the woman who tried to cut in front of me sits down at my table and waves her hand in front of my face. We have the following exchange. Woman: so, are you blind or what? Me: pardon. Woman: like, how much can you see? Are you faking? Just how blind are you? Me: I saw enough to know you were attempting to cut in front of a blind person. Woman: so you can see. Waves hand in my face again. Can you see this? Why do you need a cane if you can see? Is it macular degeneration or what? Me: ma'am, it's too early for this. Please leave my table. I don't owe you an explanation or any part of my medical history. I'm just trying to enjoy my drink in peace while I wait for my guide. Woman: geez, I was just asking. Huffs and leaves for parts unknown, thank God. I don't know why people see someone who is disabled and feel entitled to their story or their medical devices. I've had people grab my cane and pull me where they want me to go. Parents who think it's cute to let their kids grab my cane, it's not. Last 4th of July, a random woman saw me walking with my family and grabbed my arm to drag me over to her son, who had recently lost his eyesight, so I could tell him my story. She didn't ask, just grabbed. My daughter let her know how horribly inappropriate that was, and this woman was super offended because she was just trying to help her son adapt to his new reality. Like she thought I owed that to her by daring to be blind. Disabled people aren't sideshows. We're just trying to live our lives, just like you are. The next one is an entitled parent story. Got another story about my mom to share. This one happened about 14 years ago now. I, then a 21-year-old male, and my wife, then 22-year-old female, were happy to announce that we were expecting our first child. We had been trying for a while, and had been told by the wife's doctor that she had some complications that would make it very difficult for her to conceive. I don't remember what the issue was, but it wasn't impossible. Just difficult. We had basically given up on trying. We were just enjoying our lives together and having the backburner hope that it might happen one day, and it did. We were both overjoyed and terrified. Nothing is as real as finding out you are expecting child -1, and it can be a lot to take in at once. Everyone is excited. Congrats all around, my parents' first grandchild, etc. My dad was probably the most wholesome I had ever seen or heard him be when we told him the news. My mom was over the moon too, at first. After the first couple of months, we started really trying to hunt down names. We had already considered and rejected the idea of naming our son after any family member. We just weren't interested in that. We both subscribed to the idea that the sound of a name is important. Your name is the very first impression people will have of you, before even looking into your eyes. They can already have an opinion of you, and we wanted it to be a good one. I won't give details of what name we chose or what names we rejected. I'm not trying to bash anyone's name, and I think now that actions are much more important than how a name sounds. When we told the families what we had decided to name him, one person took umbrage with our choice. Of course, my mom. According to my mother, at least one person in each generation needs to have the name. "It's the family name!" she practically wailed at me when I wouldn't budge. "It's the same name I gave you. For the record, I do not like my first name, and I'm never called by it. I am mostly called by nicknames or my last name, never my first. I don't hate it, I just don't feel like it suits me or my personality. It is not a silly or archaic name, just not for me. It turned into quite a thing." I can't really remember all that she said, but suffice to say, we were the biggest traitors to the family, and we were tearing down tradition. She blamed my wife, saying that she had brainwashed me into it and all that. I was the one who came up with the name we wound up going with for him. Well, I talked to my grandma, and she said that the name wasn't really the name. It was her husband's name, and she named one of her sons the same. My mom named me with it and decided it was tradition. We had several months of no contact after that because frankly we didn't want to deal with her BS. More stories to follow later. Ciao for now. The next one is an entitled people's story. It's a baffling phenomenon, the prevalence of power-hungry homeowner association presidents in South Africa. It seems as though every neighborhood has its fair share of crazed individuals who revel in the authority bestowed upon them. But let me rewind a bit and provide some context. I've never been a fan of homeowners associations. To me, their purpose is dubious at best. My neighborhood was perfectly fine without one, and yet, fate had decided that we needed one. Our homeowner association was led by a corrupt individual, a despicable creature who seemed more interested in lining his pockets than improving the community. Resolutely, I chose not to join the homeowner association. Their president, however, took my decision as a personal affront, and embarked on a relentless campaign to coerce me into submission. Whenever I stepped outside, he conveniently materialized to inundate me with persuasive speeches extolling the virtues of the homeowner association. His persistent attempts to wear me down were futile. Letters, phone calls, and unwelcome visits bombarded me ceaselessly. It was apparent that this man had a master plan to hound me until I yielded and joined the homeowner association. But I was not about to squander my hard-earned money, enabling him to indulge his avarice. I would rather spend it on frivolous indulgences than surrender it to the man who had become a perpetual thorn in my side. Realizing that his previous tactics had failed, the president resolved to take more extreme measures. And so, one fateful evening, as I sat down to dinner, the doorbell rang persistently. Annoyed, but sensing the possibility of an emergency, I answered the door, only to come face to face with none other than the homeowner association president himself, brandishing a menacing shotgun. Fear coursed through my veins as he barked orders, demanding that I vacate my own property. I complied, retreating to the street, feeling helpless and violated. It was then that he laid down his ultimatum: join the homeowner association or face his wrath. The audacity of his demand was chilling, but I dared not question his resolve. I drove away, vowing to return sooner than he expected. Seeking solace and support, I sought refuge with a friend who, understanding the gravity of the situation, reluctantly provided me with a firearm. While I knew it was unorthodox and risky, I couldn't bear the thought of being defenseless. I harbored no intention of causing harm, merely a desire to protect myself if the need arose. With no other viable options and my legal rights on my side, I returned to reclaim my home. Much to my dismay, it appeared that the homeowner association president had been surveilling my property. No sooner had I stepped foot inside than he materialized, his rage palpable. Aiming his shotgun at my face, he threatened me once again. My hand trembled as I tightened my grip on the handgun, the line between life and death growing thin. In that moment of desperation, I fired a shot, aiming for his leg. It was a desperate plea to deter him, a plea that I'd hoped would only graze him or strike the ground. Yet fate had other plans. He screamed in agony, and the sound of sirens pierced the air as the police and ambulance arrived swiftly. With his own action sealed his fate. Unable to concoct a believable story of innocence, he confessed to his despicable motives. Admitting to threatening me due to my non-compliance with the homeowner association, he claimed he never intended to harm me. But his confession did little to erase the terror he had inflicted upon me. While I did face some legal repercussions for my possession of an unauthorized firearm, the punishment was minimal, a mere warning and a nominal fine. The incident left me with an aversion to firearms, witnessing firsthand the catastrophic consequences they can cause. Meanwhile, the corrupt homeowner association president faced more severe consequences. An investigation into his finances revealed the extent of his embezzlement, a crime that rightfully warranted punishment. He was ordered to repay the misappropriated funds, ensuring their redirection toward genuinely benefiting the community. Furthermore, he was promptly removed from his position of authority, and the entire episode served as a cautionary tale, casting doubt upon the integrity of homeowner associations. In a twist of poetic justice, a few weeks later, a mighty storm ravaged the neighborhood, reducing the former president's house to ruins. It felt as though a divine hand had intervened, demonstrating that wrongdoing ultimately begets retribution. Inspired by this fortuitous turn of events, we decided to utilize the funds recovered from the president's misdeeds to create a community garden on what was once his property. The next one is a pro-revenge story. So a friend and I moved into this newly renovated apartment in Brooklyn. It's nice enough, but just about every one of the 14 units has some sort of weird problem. One unit had the hot and cold water mixed up, flush a few times and get a heated toilet. One unit had none of the outlets grounded, and one unit had gaps around the windows. The problem in our unit was a leak in the air conditioner lines. The leak was probably at the roof, but we ended up with no AC. We called them, and it took a month to get someone. He refilled the lines, and a week later the problem came back. We spent the summer getting the system topped up every week. At the end of the summer, they decided that our repairs and all of the neighbors were getting too expensive. So they sent us bills. Our bill was in the tens of thousands of dollars. Recharging that system weekly must have been expensive. They also started trying to charge every unit for any infraction, like $100 for every unit for a single scrap of paper found in a hall. The tenants all got together to have a little meeting. It turns out that they never got a certificate of occupancy for the building. The city had it on the books as a furniture warehouse. So collectively, we all just stopped paying them. Rent, fines, fees, nothing. We retained a lawyer and just lived there. The company tried to get us out by cutting lighting and other services. We contacted the lawyer, the company would get fined, and we'd get our lights back. They tried to change the main lock once, but we let the locksmith know what was going on, so he stopped. They didn't try it a second time. The first floor of the building was an off-track betting parlor. They were particularly noisy and obnoxious, so one resident called the health department over a moldy loaf of bread we found in the basement. One of my best memories was watching a bunch of guys in hazmat suits clear out the betting parlor so they could run tests. Eventually, they tried to get the certificates, but to do that, they needed to do inspections with the drywall removed. They tried to do it while we lived there, and the lawyer fought it for not being in a livable state. Finally, they realized they needed us out. If they got the certificate of occupancy while we were still there, we'd owe back rent. They took us to court to get evictions. The lawyer got everything pushed back as far as he could, but finally we went to city court. The lawyer pointed out that they were trying to evict 14 units, but you can't evict more than 10 at a time. The court ejected the case. I don't think their lawyer got a single word in, so now we have a county court date for an ejection instead of an eviction. Again, the lawyer pushed it out as much as he could, but eventually we went. The court agreed to eject us all, but saw the evidence of lighting and lock tampering. The court asked our lawyer what would be a reasonable time frame. The lawyer asked for 4 months. The judge gave us 6. Everyone stayed until the last month. At the end of it all, we got to live in a newly renovated apartment in a trendy area of Brooklyn for free for a little over a year. The next one is a petty revenge story. After 5 years of marriage and endless false promises, I finally get my personal revenge. My ex-husband, 32, and I, 33, got married in 2017 after 1 year of a long-distance relationship between the US and Germany. We sealed the deal, got married in the US, and he wanted me to live with him in the good old US of A because he didn't want to learn another language. To make things easier, he moved in with me in Germany for a job I helped him get, so we would have time to finalize my plans for emigration and immigration. Now my ex didn't even get started gathering all the required documents for himself to be my sponsor. Said and done, I had all the documents well sorted out, canceled all my contracts, sold my belongings, sent large parts of my things to the US, and said goodbye to my lovely home, friends, and family. Little did I know my ex-husband did not do a single bit of research or even do his part for my immigration process, and I wasn't able to set foot on the plane that would bring me to my new home. Long story short, he left for the US without me, and I was homeless with a suitcase and 2 cats. He continued to lead me on with promises to come and get me. Meanwhile, he started a polyamorous affair. Later, he got involved with a 21-year-old young lady. I lived with my parents for a few months to get back on my feet, find a new apartment, and a new source of income. Now, I never went to German officials to get our marriage recognized in Germany, mostly because I didn't think it was necessary since we planned to live together in the US. But my laziness should prove to be useful later. Since he was with his new girlfriend, 21, I broke off the relationship. In the US, we still count as married, and focused on myself, regaining my independence, and rebuilding my life in my home country. I fell in love with an acquaintance, 31, I've known for 13 years, and we soon found that we have very similar goals in life, and the same ideals and wishes for a monogamous life. Meanwhile, I've been in contact with my ex to finally get him to start the divorce process in the US. Since the marriage was closed in the US, only a US citizen is able to petition for divorce at the district court. I didn't want my name to be further affiliated with him, and I also didn't see the reason why he should further profit from tax benefits. I made it clear that I didn't want this anymore and wanted to move on. Finally, he got the process started and forgot one single thing. I am not an American citizen. So everything that applies in the US when it comes to paperwork doesn't apply to me in Germany. It means serving me via email? Nope. Wanting me to sign something electronically? Nope. Not possible. All they would have to do is send me the notarized, signed, and translated paperwork via physical mail. But they don't, so I get email after email with pleas to get me to sign the US divorce papers electronically. With every email his lawyer sends me, his pay ramps up. Don't get me wrong, I certainly told the lawyer what he has to do in order to get me to sign a legally significant piece of paper, but I guess he doesn't know international laws. So at this point, my ex still sits on all of my belongings I asked him to give back, and since he doesn't do that, I'll keep collecting spam mails from his lawyer. That's my personal revenge for leading me on, using my hopeless romantic heart, and leaving me alone when things got tough. I don't count as married in Germany, and am currently expecting a little baby boy with my partner, and we are building a life together without false promises. The next one is an entitled people story. My aunt was one of 2 kids my grandparents had. My mother was the polar opposite of my aunt. She worked from the age of 12 in my grandfather's shop, never asked for anything, and eventually managed to start her own business. My aunt never held down a job until the age of 26, was constantly stealing from her parents, and was constantly in trouble. Despite this, my aunt was spoiled by my grandmother, and so were her kids. She had 3 kids from 3 different men, and her first husband was not one of them, if you know what I mean. It didn't matter what my aunt or her kids did, my grandmother would always jump to their defense. She never had time for my mom and her kids, unless it was to get something from us. The only reason my mom would visit her was because she loved my grandfather. My grandfather passed away in 2004, and a few months after, my nan decided to write up a new will. My mother and my aunt were both present for it when she signed it, so they knew what was in it. It made it so that when she passed away, her home would be sold and the money split 25% each to my mom and aunt, and the remaining 50% would go evenly to the grandkids. At the time, the home was worth more than £500,000, so it would be a nice little inheritance, but nothing life-changing. In 2010, my mom died after an accident and did not have a current will in place. As she no longer had her business and was renting a house, she didn't have anything of much monetary value. The only thing she was concerned about was what would be done at her funeral should she have passed away. But she had told me everything she wanted. The music, the flowers, the coffin color, and even what people were to wear at the funeral. She wanted people to wear bright, warm colors. So when she passed, my aunt and Nan took over all the arrangements and tried to undo all the things I had told them. The songs were going to be songs I knew Mom didn't like. The flowers were all the wrong colors, and they picked a hideous coffin. With the help of my siblings, we were able to change a few of the things back to what they were supposed to be. But the coffin couldn't be changed for some reason, and my Nan refused to let people come dressed as clowns, so it was all black. It was frustrating. After the funeral, my Nan had her will changed. My siblings and I were told by our aunt that she didn't have any involvement with the writing of the will, and our Nan told us that she changed it so that Mom's share would go to her kids instead. All good, we thought. After Mom passed away, my Nan just stopped talking about my mom. At first, we thought it was because she was still recovering from losing her daughter, but even 5 years after Mom passed, she still wouldn't talk about her. Even if you brought up a story about Mom, Nan would very obviously try to change the subject, usually about how hard my aunt and her crappy kids had it. And if you went to talk to her about your own problems, she would somehow bring it back to my aunt. I had suffered a mental breakdown after my mom's death, so you can imagine how much it hurt to hear, well, X has had it so much worse. In 2016, my Nan passed away. She had written down what she wanted to be done for her funeral, and it was basically all the same things she had picked out for my mom's funeral, even the music to be played. I don't know why she tried to have a dress rehearsal funeral using my mom as the stand-in, but it was obvious that's what she was trying to do. So after a couple of months, our siblings and I were waiting to hear about the will reading, and my aunt kept telling me, "Oh, it'll be another month before we can do the reading." I didn't mind. I wasn't fussed about the money, to be honest. But my oldest brother was hoping to use the money to pay for a honeymoon for him and his then-fiancée, and my younger brother was about to start uni, so it would be a hell of a help. Eventually, my dad bumped into the solicitor my grandmother had used to deal with her will, and asked what was happening. The solicitor let slip that the will had already been read and that it left everything to my aunt. When my dad questioned this, the solicitor told him that my aunt had been present when the will was written, despite promising that she had nothing to do with it. When confronted, my aunt initially tried to deny it, but eventually admitted to lying to all of us. She showed us the will, and it confirmed what we already knew. The house and all its contents were now my aunt's. This included my grandfather's war medals. He fought in the Second World War. When I told her that he had promised them to me before he died, she said, "Well, unless you have it in writing, you will have nothing in this house. Anyway, I already gave them to Clive." My heart sank. Clive, not his real name obviously, was her eldest son and the dictionary definition of a duck-up. He'd been in and out of prison for stealing and dealing drugs. I knew that the moment that prick got his hands on my grandfather's medals, they would have been sold off. We looked into taking her to court over the will, but everyone we spoke to said that we probably wouldn't get anything out of it. She immediately put the house up for sale at close to £750,000. She had pissed off too many people in our town, so she was going to sell the house and move closer to her daughter, who lives in a big city. An offer was made on the house, and she put down a deposit on a house near the big city. And I thought that was that. Here's where karma comes into play. The people who wanted my Nan's house had a survey done on the house to see if there were issues. And oh boy, were there. Turns out that the land the house was built on was too soft for the type of house it was, and it was sinking. It had sunk about 2 cm in the 40-plus years my Nan and Granddad had lived there, but the sinking was accelerating to 1 cm per year. This meant that within the next 3 years, the house would need some serious work or be knocked down. The new value of the house? £60,000. The buyers immediately pulled out, having not even put down a deposit. She couldn't buy her new house, but still had to pay the deposit on it. And while this was happening, she let Clive move in with her into her house that she rented from the council. He wasn't allowed to live in any of the council houses because he had trashed every single one he'd ever been given. Someone reported this, and she was kicked out of her home. She was forced to move into my Nan's old home as she couldn't live anywhere else. So there she is, living in a crumbling house with her shithead son and her partner. She was stuck there for 2 years. Every time I saw her, she would try to start talking to me, and I would just ignore her and walk off. One time, as I was walking away, she screamed, "Your mother deserved to die for having a retard like you," in the middle of a busy street. Someone reported her to the police and she had an official warning from them and was ridiculed on Facebook. Every time I saw her after that, she looked more and more miserable. Eventually, she sold the house for something like £85,000 and moved in with her daughter in the big city. I lost contact with her and her kids after this. I thought karma had been issued. Oh, but karma still wasn't done with her. I bumped into one of her former friends and she told me what happened after she left our town. She moved into her daughter's home, let's call her Sue, but they only had a 3-bedroom house and 3 kids. My aunt and her partner had to live in the smallest room in the house, while my aunt looked for a job and a home to rent. Even with £85,000, she couldn't afford a home anywhere. After about a month, my aunt's partner ran off after emptying her account. She was left stranded in Sue's house, not contributing anything because all the money she makes goes into bingo. Eventually, Sue and my aunt got into a screaming match, and my aunt said something along the lines of, "I should have aborted you." Sue immediately kicked her out of her house. So again, there's my aunt, in a city where she knows nobody, no money, no home, and the last bridge she had is a smoldering wreck. The last anyone has heard, she was living in a caravan in the roughest part of the city, and she can no longer work because she's suffering from early onset arthritis and can no longer move her hands. I know I shouldn't find joy in something like this happening to another person, but it does bring me some peace as to what happened. The next one is an entitled parent's story. I went out on a Friday for a few hours with some friends, just some shopping and catching up. I hadn't seen some of them for the last 2 years due to COVID when we used to hang out almost every week. And I am leaving the country in a few weeks, so we took this opportunity to catch up and have a farewell party. I was out from late afternoon until about 9 or 10 p.m. when I got home. I took out my keys to unlock the gate, but they wouldn't fit. I tried to turn the key around, yes, like a USB, thinking it might fit the other way, but it still wouldn't go in. I called my mother, but she didn't pick up. I called my grandmother, who lives with me, but she was also out with her friends and wouldn't be home anytime soon. At this point, I was pissed. My mother had already burned a couple of my work pants the day before because I refused to wear a dress for work. My line of work requires me to move around a lot, so a dress or office skirt was not suitable for my environment. I shook the gate, but no one was home, so I picked the lock. After a few tries, I managed to open the metal gate. Luckily, the wooden door behind it was not locked. The neighbors did call the police, and of course I had to show them that I actually lived there and it was my legal address. I took some essentials and went to stay at my friend's house for the night because I couldn't lock the door back, and I didn't feel safe in the house without a locked door. The next day, my grandmother and I were invited to a pre-wedding event. It was kind of a meeting with the elders and an engagement party ceremony at a cafe. My mother only sent me the address and time for it. It was perfectly normal for my grandmother to be invited to these things via my mother. My grandmother doesn't know how to use a phone other than basic functions like calling. We showed up on time at the cafe and were escorted to a booth-type seat at the corner of the cafe. The booth already had a lady, mid-40s, 50s, and a guy. I assumed she was the mother and the guy was her son. The moment we sat down, the lady took out a calendar and notepads filled with lists of flower arrangements, color schemes, menus, dresses, hairstyles, etc. She introduced her son, who is 28 by the way, and told me what he does for a living, what he studies, and where. She thanked me for agreeing to marry him. I looked at her, then at her son, and then at the wedding planners and notes. It finally registered that this was for my wedding. My grandmother was pissed, to say the least. I apologized to the lady and said there must be some kind of misunderstanding between us, because I came to attend someone's engagement party, not plan my own. I added that I was only 20 this year. My grandmother then rudely asked why she thought that I would be marrying her son. The lady replied that her mother contacted her and said her daughter was looking for a partner and husband to settle down, so she, referring to me, could move out. My grandmother calmly said to the lady that she had been lied to, and that I was not going to be getting married anytime soon. She said her son seems nice, and hopes he finds someone who likes him to marry in the future, but it was not going to be me. We got up and left. When we got home, I found my things stuffed in a black plastic bag beside the door. My grandmother opened the door and told me to bring my stuff in. The moment I stepped through the door, my mother yelled that she put so much effort into finding a guy who would take a girl like me to marry, and that I should be grateful she didn't just marry me off to an older dude. She said I should be happy she found someone my age. She told me I embarrassed her because the mother called her and told her what she did was not okay, and she didn't even ask or inform me properly. My grandmother started to shout at my mother in Cantonese, which resulted in them being in a heated argument for almost 30 minutes. and my grandmother kicked my mother out. Of course, my mother moaned about and cried about it before leaving. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.